Henry Kissinger, a former national security advisor and Secretary of State of the United States who fled Nazi Germany as a young man and went on to become one of the most significant and divisive foreign policy figures in American history, passed away. He was 100 years old. Kissinger passed away on Wednesday at his Connecticut home, according to a statement released by Kissinger Associates, his consulting business. The cause of death was not disclosed by the company. In the 1970s, Kissinger was a byword for U.S. foreign policy. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in bringing an end to U.S. military involvement in the Vietnam War. He is also recognized for having played a key role in President Richard Nixon's visit to Communist China in 1972 and other acts of covert diplomacy that helped open up the country to the West and the United States. However, he was also detested by many for his support of a coup against Chile's democratic government and for bombing Cambodia during the Vietnam War, which helped the genocidal Khmer Rouge regime to rise to power. Following the aftermath of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Kissinger used what became known as shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East to keep Israeli and Arab forces apart. Up until the Reagan years, U.S. policy was primarily determined by his détente approach to U.S.-Soviet relations, which helped to reduce tensions and result in multiple arms control agreements. However, a number of congressmen protested the Nixon-Kissinger foreign policy's secrecy, and human rights advocates denounced Kissinger for what they perceived to be his disregard for human rights in other nations. The Vietnam War complicated Kissinger's legacy more than any other issue. Nixon promised a secret plan to end the war, and when he assumed office in 1969, about 30,000 Americans had already lost their lives in Vietnam. The U.S. continued to be involved in the war throughout Nixon's administration, despite efforts to give the South Vietnamese government more responsibility for combat. Critics charged Nixon and Kissinger with needlessly escalating the conflict, and U.S. involvement ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon and the loss of over 58,000 American lives. In a highly contentious choice, Kissinger and Le Duc, though, his North Vietnamese counterpart, shared the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize for the Paris Peace Accords. Though refused to accept the prize, citing the lack of real peace in Vietnam, and 2 Nobel Committee members resigned in protest. The bombings of Laos and Cambodia, where the violent Khmer Rouge movement utilized the American bombs as a recruiting tool before seizing power and committing one of the worst genocides of the 20th century, were the main source of domestic outrage in the U.S. over the war. In 2005, Kissinger said to CNN's Wolf Blitzer, "For me, the tragedy of Vietnam was the divisions that occurred in the United States that made it, in the end, impossible to achieve an outcome that was compatible with the sacrifices that had been made." Even though Nixon's downfall amid the Watergate scandal diminished Kissinger's influence as a powerful architect of U.S. foreign policy, he remained a freewheeling influencer whose reflections on diplomacy were always well received.